Okay, my good friends, so hope you recharge your batteries and we're gonna keep studying the classical variation of the French. In this case, after knight f6, e5, knight fd7, now we cover the main move, pawn to f4. Makes sense since we're gonna, strike in the center with c5, so this pawn on e5 needs more protection. So c5, knight to f3, knight to c6, and then bishop to e3. Well, in this position, in my database, there are 35,000 games. So I'm going to recommend you a variation where we only have 400 games. So I'm 99% sure that it's going to surprise your opponents. Here, well, the main variations are c takes d4, a6 in order to proceed with b5, queen b6, heavy theory as well. But the move I'm recommending you guys is rook to b8. A very interesting and surprising move. What is the idea? Well, we want to push b5 in the future. This can be done with the move queen to a5 as well. Sorry, we need queen a5 in order to push b5. We don't want to do it with a6. Otherwise, we would have played a6 instead of rook b8. But why we want the pawn on a7? Because there are certain variations where we want to play bishop a6 after b5, b4. So you guys know this is our worst piece in the French, so it makes tremendous sense to trade it for the f1 bishop. Okay? So here after queen d2 we play queen a5, that's the main variation, but first we need to study other options like bishop e2, like a3, or d takes c5. Let's start with the move bishop e2. So once the bishop has landed on e2, we can transpose to one of the main lines in the classical variation where the inclusion of these two moves favor a little bit black. And this is c takes d4, knight takes d4, and bishop to c5. Well, these positions are extremely fun to play, especially if white goes for long castle, since we're gonna be castled in this side of the board, and this is just a pawn race. Usually, white tries to push the h-pawn, and then, well, we have different plans. Usually, the pawn goes to a6, and then we wanna capture on d4, then we wanna play b5, b4, a5, and at some point, bring the bishop to a6, and our counterplay is based on the c file and also in these two pawns stacking the white king. Some other cases we're gonna play bishop d4 and queen a5 when the king is on c1 in order to push b5, b4 really fast. So extremely fun to play. Here white plays queen to d2 and then short castle. And now white has two possible plans, either to go short castle or long castle. Let's start with short castle. This is much more solid, but less dangerous for black. Here we're gonna play a6. Always useful, preparing an eventual b5. And now I have analyzed here two possibilities, knight d1 or king h1. Knight d1 makes sense, since white wants to reinforce with c3, right? And now, well, we have two options. Bishop takes d4, this is the engine suggestion. Really solid, since the engine wants to play f6 here, knight takes d4, queen f6, and play this endgame. I think this is nothing special for white. White has to lose many tempi in order to bring the knight to e5, and then we have some plans like, bringing the king to d6, some cases, the bishop on d7, pawn on b5, b4. So this is very close to equality. I know it's not a lot of fun to play. That's why I also recommend you knight takes d4. I think I prefer this variation, guys, because it keeps more pieces over the board. Bishop takes d4, bishop takes d4, queen takes d4, and b5. We have a lot of ideas here. Well, b4, queen a5, queen c5, or queen b6, b4, a5, bishop a6. So still the position is very alive, very much alive, and plans with f5 are not so dangerous anymore, since this king is in this part of the of the board. And you know, e5 could be extremely weak after f5, for instance, queen c7. Because this is nothing special for white. White has also tried move number for 12, sorry, king h1. And now knight takes d4 and b5 with the same idea, b4 and a5. Here I have covered f5 and bishop c5. After f5, just very important to say that we can take on f5. This is the typical reaction. And now this was seen in the game Sakenova versus our king, Blue Baum, knight takes d5. Now black was already better with bishop takes d4 and knight b6, using the pin, defending the knight, attacking the knight, defending the knight, and now we can have a massive exchange with bishop takes d5 followed by g6, where I think all the endgames are favorable for black since, well, e5 is super weak. The engine is saying that this is minus 0.4 or something for black. So f5 is the rupture that white is hoping for, but in this case it's just not working. So move number 14, white can also try bishop takes c5. Knight takes c5. And once again, f5 is a move that we need to consider. And also queen to d4, centralizing and blocking the d5 pawn. So after f5, once again, this is premature. We can just take. And after knight takes, rook e8 and e5 is just falling. So that's why queen d4 is a better move, but here I like queen b6, preparing b4. So after a3, we have many options. Knight d7 is very interesting, and play this endgame. Or knight a4 is a novelty and is the engine recommendation. Since now after knight b6, rook b6 is the idea, forcing knight a4, and we have good pressure against the b2 pawn. Bishop d7, rook b8, etc. And if white manages to play b3, which is not clear, then after the trades, this pawn is going to be passed and protected. Beautiful. So I think we have finished with short castle. Now let's go for the fun stuff. Long castle on move number 11. Well, here, you know, here gonna give you two recommendations. Bishop d4 is the first engine suggestion. I think white has to play very precise. White can actually be lost really soon if they don't know what they are doing. But if white does know what to do, then the position can be tricky for black. So, you know, you can decide what to do. Knight takes, a6 is more safe and more calm. So I'm going to show you both, and then you guys decide. Let's start with bishop takes d4. Bishop takes d4 and queen a5. This is our idea. We're gonna go b5 and b4 really soon. Here there is only one good move for white, which is queen to e3. Okay, what is the idea behind queen e3? White wants to reinforce the e5 pawn in order to be able to play f5. Any other move, we have a good position. Let's see what happens, for instance, after king b1 or bishop f2. After king b1, we play b5. Now this knight doesn't have a room, so bishop d3 is necessary in order to play knight e2 after b4. We first play knight takes d4, queen takes d4, and b4. Knight e2 and bishop a6. All black pieces are now attacking. If f5, now bishop takes and queen c7 and e5 is just falling. Okay, so king b1 really slow. Kind of the same applies with bishop f2, trying to keep the bishop pair. Once again, we play b5 and, you know, black is winning a piece if white plays king to b1. So that's why let's focus on queen e3, which is the best move. We want to play b5 anyway, and now f5. We need to be really careful here, since now, for instance, b4 is just losing because of f6. And we go greedy, then queen g5 followed by queen h6 is just mate. So that's why after f5 we have to take on f5. And now white's idea is not capturing on d5 naturally because of queen a2, but instead to play e6. This is white's idea. Now we play knight takes d4. Here, e takes d7 is really bad, since now, we have just too many pawns and our king is really safe. So white cannot really take on d7. White can take either on d4 or f7. If white takes on d4, here important to play knight to f6. ef7 and king f7 is just a transposition to the following position, starting with ef7. It's crazy that the best move here is to take with the king. And now white has two options. Rook takes d4 or queen takes d4. This is the position that I'm saying that could be tricky for black. It's 0-0-0, okay? But if white finds this queen e3, I believe it could be somehow risky for black to play in this position. But as you will see, it's also risky for white. So let's start with rook d4. Now knight to f6. Here the best move is not to capture here. It's queen to e5. Taking on d5, we can just play knight takes d5 and queen takes a2. Rook d1, check. Queen b2, queen a7, forcing rook b7, and then there's this trick with rook f5, but we reach this position where if I have to pick a side, I would pick naturally black, because my king is safer, right? This king on d2 is dancing in the middle of the dance floor, so I think we have better chances here. So that's why queen e5, intermediate move, attacking the rook is a better option. So how to proceed? After queen e5, we're just going to play bishop d7. Okay, keeping an eye on f5 and connecting the rook so queen b8 is not possible yet, right? So bishop d7, now knight takes d5, and here rook to b8. Rook b to e8, attacking the queen. Sorry, queen g3, this is crazy, right? Now rook takes c2, knight f6, putting an eye on the bishop on d7, and bishop c6. Knight h5, threatening queen b3 and queen takes e7. Here we have to play queen a2 in order to cover the b3 square, and this position, believe me or not, is equal. We are threatening mate, so white is forced to play king d1, and then we play rook e4. I mean, completely crazy stuff. But yeah, you can check that by yourself, play around with the engines. We are in movement 24, so I think it's time to stop. Otherwise, we are going to end up crazy here analyzing this position. It's about equal. So kind of the same applies to the move queen takes d4, move number 17, after which we play knight f6. Now knight d5 is even worse, because we just develop and take on a2 with advantage. So once again, queen e5 is the best move, bishop d7, with the same ideas that we just saw previously. Okay guys, so this is what happens after bishop takes d4. So if you don't want this like fun experiences or, you know, crazy life, you can play a6, continuing with the typical plan. Now white has a strong move here, which is knight b3, and white can also, well, continue with the typical plan of h4. Let's see what happens after knight b3. This is the best that white can achieve. Bishop e3, queen e3, and b5. Now a couple of options, bishop d3 or h4. After bishop d3, we usually proceed with b4, knight e2, a5, intending a4, so white plays knight d4, and we reach this position where after queen b6, we are ready to play bishop a6, and these positions are already better for black, because the attack is going nowhere. For instance, after f6, we can play knight e4, covering the g5 square, and after pawn takes e7, this pawn is actually our shield. Here, the attack is really fast for black. A4, B3, or even A3. Black is much better here, guys, because this pawn is actually helping us. Okay. If white goes H4, move number 14, we can play B4. And here white's idea could be to block everything. So now this plan doesn't make any sense. We need to kick this knight from there. So that's why we're playing knight B6. And we reach this endgame that I think is very playable for black. The engine is saying 0.2 or something for white. So this is the best that white can achieve. So you can decide. You can go for this variation or for the crazy one. But both of them are more than playable. Okay? What else? Am I missing something in this variation? Am I missing something? No. Yeah, this is what happens after knight b3. What happens if white plays h4? Now we need to trade this guy in order to play b5. So that's why we start with knight takes d4 and b5. What happens if white keeps pushing? We play b4, takes, and now we are actually far away of, managing to bring the bishop to a6. So that's why we change plans. We play queen a5, forcing b3, and bishop b7. We are threatening to go bishop c6, followed by bishop takes a4. White can play bishop d3. This is what happened in the game Ozorbaev versus Arkin. Blue bound, bishop c6, and knight b2. Now trading on a2 looks risky because, the maximum we can get is just a check and the king escapes. So that's why blue bound changed plans and he played queen c5. Trading queens and reaching an endgame, which is much easier to play for black because now the attack is just nothing without queens. And then we have this plan, which is nasty, right? Actually, the game continued with g4, f6, reacting in the center, h6, g6, white went f5, and black was already better after knight e6. Well, in the game, they played e4, but knight e6 was enough for an advantage. Just a healthy pawn up, and this knight is completely out of play. Okay, so I think we are done with bishop e2 on move number 8. Let's see what happens now with the move a3. a3. Once again, we can transpose to the main lines, okay? C takes d4, knight takes d4, and bishop c5. Queen d2, and short castle. Well, now white usually goes for long castle. The inclusion of a3, gives us a breaking point on b4, but at the same time, white has some interesting ideas, like very computerish lines, which are extremely difficult for a human, but very fun to study. So if white goes bishop e2 in order to go for short castle in this position, now you can play quietly with a6 once again, or you can go for a trick that I will show you. So you go with a6, short castle, knight takes d4, and queen b6. We reach this position where, we have studied similar ideas. Now a plan could be to go rook c8 and knight a4. Once again, all these ideas with f5 are not dangerous anymore with the king on g1. But you can also go with knight d to e5. The point is that white cannot really take on e5. I will show you why in a minute. White's best move is knight takes a6. Now we have to play bishop e3, knight d8, check here, knight g6, knight f7, and we reach this endgame, which is completely balanced. Okay? But if white takes on e5, then knight takes d4, and the point is there is a queen h4 check followed by queen d4, just winning the game. So you have two options here. Main move is to go long castle. We play a6, and now h4. And in this particular order, I like to recommend to take with the bishop on d4. Bishop takes d4 and b5. And this is one of the, well, most interesting positions in the whole chapter. Because like I had to spend like 2 hours, because suddenly, you know, when you're creating a course, of course you have the online database, you know, where you can check actually all the games and all the corresponding games that were played in this position. And suddenly here, you know, I couldn't understand why White was playing rook h3 basically in every game. It is one of the best prophylactic moves that I've seen in my life, but it's very deep because, I mean, I was thinking, what happens if I just play h5? Then I'm going to try to explain you why rook h3 is such a powerful move in this position. The point is, this is the more human in my opinion, but the point is that we can play b4. Now, if White takes on b4, then the idea is to take with the rook, the bishop goes back, and queen a5, right? This is normal. We are threatening to go queen a1 and mate. So king b1 is necessary, knight c5, bringing more pieces to the action, knight a2, naturally we cannot trade queens, but here there is this move, knight e4, intermediate, queen e1, keeping the pin, and now bishop d7, ignoring the threat. And after knight b4, knight takes b4, we would love to have a rook on h3. Imagine this position with a pawn on h4 and a rook on h3. White would be winning with rook a3, but it's not the case, and White is losing because queen a2 is coming with fatal consequences for White. And in this position, if the knight goes back, then, well, now this is much easier to play for Black, right? So that's why rook h3 has an exclamation mark now. Because now b4 is not accurate. Why? Because of the same variation that we were studying. Knight a2, and now bishop d7 can be met with knight takes b4 and rook a3. Crazy. Very computerish, right? Only grandmaster games here with this rook h3 idea. So instead of b4, we have to play knight takes d4. Knight takes, queen takes d4, and then queen e7. And once again, the best computer line is b4. That has been played only in 1 or 2 games. Very difficult, right? To weaken your king in that way. If White plays h5, if White plays queen b4, this is solid but not critical. We can just take and play f6. ef6 and knight f6, and Black is fine. You know, we have ideas like e5 or knight g4. This is a solid endgame. In a game, White played h5. And this is a game between Lanier Dominguez, the Cuban-American, and Bluebaum, right? Our king. So here, the best move according to the engine is b4, which reaches a crazy position, h6, and pawn takes. This is considered to be equal according to the engines. I mean, not very human. So that's why I recommend just to stop h6 by playing h6 ourselves. Right? This is what Bluebaum played versus Lanier. Now b4 was Lanier's idea. And now after f6, ef6, queen f6, rook f3 was played. Queen takes d4 and knight f6. The engine is saying that this is equal. But I think this is just better in practice for Black. You know, our only weakness is the pawn on e6, a pawn which is not easy to attack. White has some weaknesses on both sides of the board, actually, because h5 is always hanging. I feel this is a bit easier to play with the White, with the Black pieces, sorry. And finally, let's go for the strongest move, which is b4. And here we need to play like sneaky moves, like rook b7. The idea is to leave this square for the knight. The knight wants to come to c6, and why not try to push with a5. Now, the best move is rook f3. Not easy moves. What happens if White plays f5 once again, which feels very natural? Now we need to react in this way with f6. So after f6, knight e5, knight d5, queen e6, Black is fine. So ef6, queen f6, and here the pawn is pinned. The pawn is pinned, sorry. Because now this is just losing because of rook f1. So f5, f6, black's fine. What happens after rook f3? Here we need to play f6. And after bishop d3, knight b8, we have a very complex position. I expect like some theoretical development in the near future with these lines as well. Crazy this b4. I mean, h4 in order to play rook h3 and b4. I mean, only a strong grandmaster, extremely well prepared, would be able to play like this, right? Or maybe it doesn't need to be a strong grandmaster, just a guy with good preparation, right? Okay, guys, so this is what happens after, let me see, after rook h3, okay? So I think we are done. We are done with, we have finished covering a3. Let me just see, so I don't want to miss anything, right? Yeah. So we covered bishop e2. We covered a3. Now it's time to talk about the move d takes e5. I think this is just a mistake. It helps our development, right? Bishop takes e5 and knight takes e5. I mean, you don't need to know anything here, just to play natural moves. I like f5 here, just you know, stopping any kind of attacking attempt on the king side. This position is very easy to play with black. So let's go for one of the main lines, which is queen d2 on move number 8. Yeah, everybody plays queen d2 in this variation, so I expect like 70-80% of people to go with queen d2 and then queen a5 here. Well, now 4 options for white. The move d takes e5, the move a3, bishop d3, or bishop to e2. Let's start with the move d takes e5. Once again, this is not critical in my opinion. Bishop takes c5. Now 2 options, bishop c5 or knight d4. After knight d4, we can take on b4 and then play b5. The point is that we have this great square for the bishop. I think this is already very good for black, okay? If white plays knight e2, we don't trade queens, we can play b4 and play bishop a6, followed by short castle, and white struggles to develop on the king side. If white plays g3, then we can play b4 and bishop a6. Once again, we are better here, right? Short castle, knight c5, etc. And yeah. So usually when white takes on c5 is to take on c5 once again on move number 10, followed by knight b5, looking for an endgame. If white plays bishop d3 here, then we can play bishop d7, followed by b5. Important to mention that b4 is not possible because of knight b4 and the rook is hanging, and b4 is coming with a good position. And if white plays knight b5, then queen takes d2 and f6, we blow the center up. White has tried 2 options here, bishop d3 or rook e1. After rook e1, we can just take on e5 and bishop d7. I really like this kind of endgame. You know, our king is going to be well placed on e7, then the rook can come to f8, and then at some point this bishop can be regrouped via e8 and then g6 or h5. This pawn could be suffering in the near future. And if white plays bishop d3, we can go short castle. And yeah, I think this position is also very good for black, right? So d takes e5, really not very critical. Let's see what happens after the move bishop takes bishop d3. Nothing stops us from playing b5 followed by b4. Now white has tried a3 or short castle. After short castle, we can play b4, knight d1, and now c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight takes d4, and bishop c5. Winning a tempo, takes, and for instance, queen b6. If we manage to play bishop a6, and we are going to manage, then of course there is no attack against our king. We can castle safely in the near future. We can bring the knight to c5, and with that semi-open file on the c file, we have, I think, an easier position to play. Alan Pichot on move number 10 played a3 versus our king, Blue Baum. Blue Baum played b4, using the fact that white cannot take since the rook on a1 is unprotected. Knight d1, and here we're gonna recommend the novelty b takes a3. The point is that after queen takes a5, knight takes a5, white cannot really take with the rook. Why? Because there is c4, attacking the bishop and the rook, and then you could say, Pepe, what happens after rook a5? What happens is that after bishop b4 check, white just, gets an exchange for free and a winning position. So that's why white is forced to take with a pawn, and this position, of course, without queens and the structure like that, is just a little bit better for black. So bishop d3, not very critical. We covered bishop d takes c5 and bishop d3. What happens after a3? Sorry, a3. What is... Sorry, guys. What happens after a3 here? What is the idea behind a3? The idea is super sneaky. It's to play rook a2. It's some sort of really strange prophylaxis versus b4, since now after a takes b4, the rook is protected. But now we're gonna flip plans. We're gonna play a6 in order to protect the b5 pawn. So now we're gonna retreat the queen to c7, and then it's true that white has managed to stop b4 for the moment, but the rook is completely misplaced on a2. So here I have covered d takes c5 and bishop e2. After bishop e2, we can just play our move, queen c7, short castle, and then c takes d4. Once again, transposing to those lines, those main lines, where the rook is now on a2. Let's say knight d1, trying to reinforce with c3, and then it's just the right time to take once again. Short castle. Taking on c2 is a little bit risky because of knight c3. That's why we go for short castle. And here, knight c5. The plan is simple. We're gonna play bishop d7 and a5 and b4 is if white is not doing anything. And after f5, we can even take on f5. Thanks to this intermediate move, nice e6, also attacking the queen, and white cannot really protect both pawns at the same time, right? We have the queen targeting both of them. So let me see, we were covering a3 followed by rook a2. Yeah, very important to mention here, move number 11, that after d takes e5, we cannot take back. Why? Because there is b4. Okay, and now the rook on a2 is protected. So important to play first b4, take with the queen, and now, c5 is falling in the next move with a good position. Okay, guys, so white can also try bishop e2. This is one of the best suggestions from the engine. And after b4, the idea is not to follow with short castle. Okay, the idea, once again, is not human at all. It's to play a4. I mean, if someone plays bishop e2 followed by a4, it's because they have prepared the position. I mean, it's not a very common way to play, right? If white plays short castle, now we see the power of our variation. Because now after b4, let's say bishop e7, knight f2, the bishop can come to a6. And this is why this variation is, I would say it has an advantage compared to the variation where we play with a6 and b5. And the reason is that we can get rid of this rubbish bishop. Queen a6. And now several options here for white. Black is already fine. Just to show you a couple of lines. What happens after knight d3? We can play c4 and we can be extremely greedy with rook b5 and rook a5. Here we can take the pawn on a2, and I don't see enough compensation for the pawn. The attack is nothing. There is no light square bishop. The king is solid here. The king can run away if necessary. And if white takes on c5, we are always happy when we see this move. Looking for the e4 square. f5, the only critical test. But here, once again, we can take. And after bishop c5, queen takes d5. Now we have this funny looking move, queen b5, threatening bishop f2 check. If white goes king h1, they just fell for the trick. The queen is trapped. Only square is b3, and after knight a5, incredibly, the queen is completely trapped. Beautiful stuff. So, on move number 14, if white goes f5 straight away, we can just take on d4. And ef5, the idea is to go knight f8 and knight e6 with a pawn up. So yeah, short castle, basically you don't need to know anything. Just b4 and bishop a6 and you'll be fine. But you need to know a lot of stuff if white plays a4. Because here, we're going to play a6, covering the b5 square. And after short castle, our idea is to play b4. Because now a takes b5 is a threat naturally since the white's rook are connected now. But we play b4 and white's idea is to jump to b5. Using the fact that if we take, pawn takes, attacking the queen, and then white regains the piece with a good position. So, once again, I expect a lot of theoretical development after this position. There are already a couple of games. And when I was talking to one of my friends, Grandmaster Miguel Santos, who is also working for this site, he was asking me, Pepe, have you covered this line, bishop e2 and a4? We try to help each other with variations in the courses and stuff like that. And yeah, also only a few games, but one of the most critical tests. Here, important move to remember, guys, c4. Now we are naturally threatening to capture on b5. So white's main idea here is to play knight d6, takes, and short castle. And we reach this position, which is super rich and super interesting. Some comments about that. White has the bishop pair and some attacking chances on the king side, right? And our best asset is that this pawn is weak and probably is going to be ours in few moves. So only one game with this position. Here in that game, white played knight e5. So I also covered the novelty g4. I think we can start with b3, offering a queen trade, which white should avoid. And then f5, stopping the attack like immediately. And now the idea is always the same. Just to retreat the knight and then capture this guy. For instance, after knight e5, we can play knight d8 with the idea of going queen b6 and queen d6. If white closes the center, once again, we play knight d8 and queen d6. And how to evaluate this position? This position is a bit better for black. It looks like everything is super closed. If this pawn was on a3, I would say this is a dead draw because there are no breaking points. But this pawn could be very weak. If we manage to get that pawn in the future, then we can push pawn till a3 at some point and then try to create troubles over there. Another asset that we have is the e4 square. We can maneuver with a knight till e4. And in that game, move number 15, white played knight e5, after which, of course, we don't take on e5. That would be reinforcing d6. Instead, we play knight d8. Here in that game, white played b3. f5 is a very interesting novelty. One of the first suggestions from the engine. Here, you know, white sacrifices a pawn in order to protect this one. Let's say bishop f3, bishop e6, queen f2, and now, well, the idea is to play queen g3 and then some nasty ideas here, so that's why we'll play prophylactically and bring the king to h7. And this position, you know, still very complicated. One of the ideas is to play rook c8 followed by d4. And on move number 16, white has played b3. was seen in the game Demian Cook versus Kiselev, and here we deflect with the novelty c3. Queen d3. Sorry, the novelty is f6 here. You know, just giving up the a6 pawn. Take, queen a6. But we get this d6 pawn back. Position is super interesting. We got some interesting squares. This bishop can be regrouped till g6. Of course, trading these light square bishops is a very interesting idea. Anyway, rook b8 here. This is our move, right? Very surprising. You have like a 40 minutes chapter to study. I'm pretty sure you're gonna surprise your opponents. By the way, by the time I'm recording this course, well, it's only a couple of weeks before the Spanish Championship, where I intend to play this variation against a strong grandmaster. So let's see how it goes. Anyway, it's always a pleasure to be here with you guys. I'll see you in the next one.
Access ChessEnigma's free sample lessons. Enjoy videos, interactive exercises, and a digital board to practice anywhere on any device. Sign up for free and start improving your chess from home today.